Okay, good evening, everybody, or good afternoon, depending on where you are, and welcome to a EV Owner Hangout being hosted by the Union of Concerned Scientists. My name is Josh Goldman. I am a policy analyst in the Clean Vehicles program at UCS, and I'm really excited to be here with you this evening. I'm joined by a wonderful panel of experts, which you should see down below in the Hangout box. I'm joined by Ron Kaltenbau. He is a engineer and an electric vehicle enthusiast and expert and a member of the Electric Vehicle Association of DC, a wonderful association of like-minded people who are interested in electric vehicles, and they have chapters across the country. Our next panelist is Dr. Rachel Neeler. She is a Kendall Science Fellow here at the Union of Concerned Scientists, and her work is focused on the life cycle impacts of electric vehicles and their total emissions profile. And lastly, but definitely not least, we are joined by Nigel Zide. Nigel is a Nissan salesperson in lovely Boulder, Colorado, and is here to answer all of your questions related to that vehicle and much, much more. So thank you again for joining us. Just a quick word on process. So we solicited questions from everyone participating this evening about what they wanted to know about electric vehicles, and we were overwhelmed with the response. So thank you so much for getting those questions into us. We obviously cannot answer every single question that we got, so we did our best to group the questions into similar buckets, which we are answering here. And if we don't get to your question, my colleague Lucy, who is on the line as well, will be following up with people individually. And at the end, I'll provide contact information for you to reach out to Lucy if you have any additional follow-up questions as well, and we'd be happy to send them to our panelists or our own internal experts to make sure that your questions are answered. So, without further ado, let's jump in. I will start the slideshow. So here at the Union of Concerned Scientists in the Clean Vehicles program, we're really concerned about our oil use in the transportation sector. And we have a plan to reduce the nation's projected oil use by half within 20 years. It's a plan we're calling Half the Oil. You can check it out at halftheoil.org. And this plan focuses on both increasing the efficiency of our vehicles on the road as well as innovating additional solutions to our oil use. And so under the efficiency tab, I mean increasing the efficiency of our light cars and trucks, which we project can save an estimated 4.2 billion barrels of oil per day. Increasing the efficiency of our commercial vehicles, so our trucks and other heavy-duty vehicles that move our goods and freight around the country. Increasing the efficiency on planes, trains, and ships, and also increasing the oil efficiency in our buildings, homes, and industry. And on the innovation side of our half the oil equation, we focus on promoting electric cars, electric vehicles as an oil-saving solution, along with better biofuels made from non-food sources, and of course, smarter transportation systems that get people where they need to go more efficiently and with less oil use. But everyone is here this evening to talk about our very favorite electric vehicles, which I am glad to speak of as well. And we here at UCS are big fans of EVs for good reason. They are quiet, they are fun to drive, and perhaps most importantly, they are quite clean when it comes to an emission standpoint. But just looking at the vehicle itself doesn't tell the whole story when it comes to an electric vehicle's emissions profile. We need to follow that orange cord back up to the house and see where the electricity that charges the electric vehicle comes from. And in fact, we got a question that went to this which was from Don, Linda, and Stephen, all from Georgia, who asked, how do I respond to the criticism that electric vehicles are powered from dirty coal plants and therefore are not as clean as gasoline or clean diesel? That is an excellent question and one we have addressed here at the Union of Concerned Scientists. And so to answer that, we want to look at our current electricity generation across the United States grid today. So as you can see, on average, electricity generation in the U.S. is about half from coal, with the rest coming from natural gas and nuclear, and about 10% coming from wind, solar, and hydropower. But these national averages don't tell the whole story because our electricity grid is divided up into different regions. So if we look at two of the largest regions, we can see a big difference between the upper Midwestern grid displayed here, where coal dominates, and the Pacific Northwest grid, where a large share of renewables, especially hydropower, enter into the mix. And so charging an EV in these places does make a difference because the electricity is produced in a different manner. So in the upper Midwest, driving an electric vehicle is like driving a vehicle that goes 37 miles per gallon, whereas driving an electric vehicle in the Pacific Northwest region is like driving a vehicle that goes 73 miles per gallon of gasoline equivalent. And this is because those regional electricity grids are different. And so when we expand this to look across the country, you can see that it does, although the miles per gallon equivalent of electric vehicles does vary from region to region, on average, no matter where you plug an electric vehicle in, you are going to be doing better than some of the best hybrid gasoline vehicles on the market today. So to respond to that initial question, even if you live in a regional electricity grid that is dominated by relatively dirty coal power, your electric vehicle still has a positive miles per gallon equivalent compared to internal combustion engines or just gasoline-powered vehicles. So that's the story today. And if we look at where our electricity generation is going tomorrow, right now we see a major shift taking place because coal is beginning to decline as old, dirty, and inefficient coal-fired power plants are shut down, whereas the share of natural gas that is powering our electricity grid is growing along with renewables. But if we continue down this path, we are not going to meet the climate objectives that we need to meet to address the challenge of climate change. So down this path you see we will only achieve a modest reduction in the overall emissions from our electricity generation sector. So this is why at UCS we see changing the path forward and focusing on an electricity sector that produces electricity from renewable resources and limits the amount of coal and natural gas and other fossil fuels in our electricity mix. And if we reach this path forward, one of the reasons why we are so excited about electric vehicles is that when they're charged by renewable resources, they can achieve an equivalent of around 500 miles per gallon, which is obviously much better than any gasoline vehicle on the road today. Now, one other question that we got, which we have already answered here at UCS, is what is battery range and how do I respond to the criticism that I like to travel and an electric car is only for traveling short trips in town? So these are great questions, and we wanted to determine how many Americans today can use an electric vehicle and whether the technology of electric vehicles is to the point where it can meet the needs of many driving Americans. So this past year we conducted a national survey in conjunction with Consumers Union, and we found that 42% of American households with a vehicle could use one of today's electric vehicles. And that's quite a big number. That translates into about 42 million households. And so what you see here, these are the three main criteria that we had for making this determination. And this determination was based on a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, so not a battery electric vehicle. So we looked at whether people have access to parking in a plug, whether they need to carry 4 or fewer passengers, and whether they need to haul or tow gear. Now, when it comes to range, we wanted to know how far people drive on a daily basis. They go to work, back and forth, maybe they go to the store to run some errands, they go pick up their children from somewhere, and what we found is that 69% of American drivers drive less than 60 miles on weekdays. And this is well within the range of many of the battery electric vehicles or total electric vehicles that are on the market today. So you'll see, for example, the Tesla goes 265 miles per charge, the Chevy Spark electric vehicle and the Honda Fit go 82, and the Nissan Leaf goes 75, and the Mitsubishi i-MiEV goes about 62. And so this demonstrates that the technology of battery electric vehicles is to the point where it can meet the needs for millions of Americans, and electric vehicles are here and they are ready to be a major part of our transportation system. So that essentially is our half the oil plan and some questions that align directly with some of our internal analysis. But now I would like to turn to our expert panelists to get their take on some of our questions. And the first one I have is from James in Minnesota, who asks, what are the implications of using an electric vehicle in a cold winter climate like Minnesota? And I thought I could turn to Nigel to answer this question. Nigel?
So there's two questions.
Other people's questions? Okay. Thanks, Nigel. Sorry, I'm having a bit of trouble hearing you. So we have one question for Ron, which is, are there any negative results for using a fast charger multiple times a day? And this question comes from Ellen in Washington.
Thanks for the question. Actually, fast charging was originally thought to be a detriment to the batteries, and the impacts are less than originally expected. One of the things that's happened, there's been a lot of testing in this area. Idaho National Laboratories is currently involved with a test that they have 4 Nissan Leafs, 2 that are fast charged all the time, 2 that are level 2 charging all the time. And they're over 40,000 miles of driving for all the vehicles, approaching 50 when the test ends. The vehicles are driven by a group of people that rotate the cars around, so they get, everyone gets all the different kind of cars. And what they're seeing is the degradation in battery life is only very slightly increased for the ones that are fast charged all the time. So the impacts are not as much as expected. Now that's not another case. Also, there's a quote I have from I'll just read this from a product manager with Mitsubishi Motors. We expect a daily quick charge not to have a significant toll on battery life.
Okay.
So the vendors do expect people to use this. Now, multiple times a day, if you do that every day, that could have an impact. But even a daily or somewhat frequent charge, multiple charges isn't seen to be having a serious problem.
Okay. Bye.
Great, thanks, Ron. So I have one more question for you, Ron, and that comes from Robert in Oregon, who asks, should an electric vehicle be charged even after a short drive, or should the batteries be nearly drained before charging them back up?
It really depends on what you're doing. There's no reason that you can't plug your electric vehicle in after a short drive. You really don't need to, but it's not something you have to avoid. There's no memory effect like you have with some of the older devices. The key with charging is extremes. If you let it drain, actually let it drain to the very last little bit would be the worst thing that you do for it. So there's no reason not to charge it up. The only reason you might have for waiting would be if you have time of use rates, you might save some money by charging it at night.
Great, thanks, Ron. All right, so now I think we are able to hear our friend Nigel all the way in Colorado, and I have a question for him. We'll answer it one more time from James in Minnesota, who asks, what are the implications of using an electric vehicle in a cold winter climate like Minnesota?
Okay, so can you hear me now?
Yes.
Right. Okay. So it will affect your mileage and it will make it shorter. I mean, it depends on the car and what the actual range of it is. Like if it was a Tesla, it'll cut that range down. If it's a Leaf, it'll cut that range down. If it's a Spark, it'll do the same. The trick, I think, with that is obviously you have to take that into account when you're looking into buying one of these cars, because in the winter you would definitely want to be plugging it in end to end. So at work and at home, so you're always keeping it pretty well charged. Plus, they have a battery heating system, so if the batteries get to -1 Fahrenheit, the heater's going to kick in. If you're not plugged into something, it's going to be drawing power from itself, and if you're plugged into a building, it will slow down the charge, but it'll obviously keep the batteries warm. But you would definitely limit yourself to probably 65 miles one way before you would definitely need a full charge to get back.
Great, thanks. So our next question comes from John and Amy, both from California, and they both asked, are there many charging stations today, and when can we expect a better infrastructure to expand the number of available stations across the country? And I will turn first to Nigel, followed by Ron. Nigel?
That's actually growing at quite a rate, and I go to lots of meetings and I meet an awful lot of people who are planning on putting in little blocks of EV stations. The 480 is obviously the kingpin of everything, because as soon as you've got a 480, then you can charge to about 80% in half an hour, assuming you're empty. So the more of them that we have, like Tesla is doing their supercharging systems. I mean, that would be the ideal thing, is if Tesla was sharing their supercharging stations with the other manufacturers so that we could all use them, as Tesla can come and use ours. It should be a two-way street, really. But it's definitely growing all the time, but it's a lot of education of companies, encouraging companies to do ride-and drives with their staff, and once their staff start getting into electric vehicles, not necessarily just a Leaf, then encouraging them, the employers, to put in charging stations for them, which we see a lot here in Colorado for sure.
So Ron, what do you think about charging stations? When do you think we're going to see more charging stations across the country, and what is it going to take to make that happen?
Well, actually, we already have a lot in some places. The story on charging stations really depends on where you live. In rural areas, they can be very sparse. But in metropolitan areas or areas of high EV adoption, they have been expanding greatly. As a member of the EVADC, we have some display materials we take to events to talk about electric vehicles, and we have a big display on charging stations. And in the Metro Washington, Baltimore area, we have a tough time keeping the chart up to date. There are just always new stations coming online, in the basically the metropolitan area, the immediate metropolitan area. So for there, again, if you're in a densely populated area or areas with high EV adoption, they're coming quite quickly. The other thing to also point out is, in terms of finding stations, most cars come with nav options that actually will help you find a station. And there are also tons of great applications for your smartphone or websites. One of the most common is called PlugShare. And PlugShare, actually, you put in where you're at, and it'll tell you where the nearest station is, both commercial stations and, quite frankly, a lot of EV owners offer up their own station at their house. Maybe not the most convenient, but it gets you, in a pinch, it can help you out. So there are literally thousands out there, and the density does depend a lot.
Great, thanks. So Nigel, if I could turn to you again, we have a great question from Denise in California, who asks, my Leaf is 3 years old, and I average 85 miles each workday for the first 2 years, meaning that she drives about 85 miles each workday for the first 2 years, and then about 20 miles per day for the last year. The battery used to charge to the 105, 110 mile range in the first year, but now it charges to only an 80-mile range. Is this expected?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it depends on how the battery's been charged. 3 years, they have Nissan put an extended warranty out on their batteries, because they had an issue in places like Texas, where the batteries got very hot and then they wouldn't hold as much of a charge. I think the question to ask there is, on the right-hand side where the charge bars are, and there's a little line of white dots on the right of that, are any of those missing? Because then you're not charging the battery is not charging to its full capacity anymore. It's a bit short for it to be only charging to 80, and you might want to get that checked with a dealership, really. I haven't seen it get like that on any of ours so far.
So let's continue the battery theme, and we have a question from Donna in Michigan, Ann in Georgia, and Lisa in Iowa, or I'm sorry, Idaho, who all asked, what is the useful lifespan of an electric vehicle battery pack, and is there a cost-effective way to replace it? So I'd like to turn to Ron, then followed by Nigel to answer this great question.
Okay, well, the first thing to point out is that most of the manufacturers warranty their batteries for 100,000 miles or more. That varies by manufacturer and also by state. There's different regulations. So in terms of financially, you have that level of protection. So that's eases a lot of people's minds there. The other thing to remember is that batteries don't just stop working. They degrade over time. And again, manufacturers vary in their warranty for what percentage of initial range they're going to cover over a certain time frame. But they all have warranties like that. It also means that your battery is going to have a useful life past when, say, you may have a car that gets 100 miles of range, that works for you. In 10 years, maybe it's down to 70 miles, which now is kind of borderline. So the battery's still useful, but it's not quite what you need for the car. That battery can be used for other purposes in a stationary application, like a solar backup or something like that, and then you get a new battery for the car. In terms of costs, that is very hard to project today because the battery pricing is coming down greatly over time. So if you looked at the cost today, it would be much higher than it will be when that battery actually would need to be replaced.
Thanks. Nigel, do you have anything to add?
No, those are good answers. Often people say, well, how much is it going to cost for a battery in 10 years? Which is a bit like asking how long is a piece of string. When you remember how much the batteries were for a Prius when they first came out, and people were quoting $18,000, and now you can have one installed, a rebuilt one for under $2,000 and a brand new one for about $4,000. So yeah, that price is just plummeting. And one day, the technology in the batteries is going to be so far beyond what we have now, we'll sort of laugh at our 100-mile range cars.
Great. So our next question comes from Deloitte in Texas, who asks, how reliable is an electric car, and where do I take it for servicing? Nigel, where can she take her EV for servicing?
Well, you would definitely want to take it to someone who knows electrics. You don't want anyone messing around with a 400-volt, 24-kilowatt-hour battery. So yeah, specialized people obviously take it back to your manufacturers. And as far as the reliability is concerned, it's a once-a-year service on it, where they just check your batteries, rotate your tires, things like that. It's the electronics and software. We've had a couple of software updates that we've done in our cars, but apart from that, there's not really been any issues. I'm sure we will have them, as does every gasoline car, and we'll work our way through them and just get more efficient with them.
Thanks. So moving from battery storage to battery charging, we have a question from Samuel in Florida and Alexander in Texas, who asked, is slow charging better for overall battery life and longevity? And does the temperature of a garage affect the amount of energy it takes to charge an EV? That is an interesting question, and I'd like to turn to Ron to try and answer it.
Thanks. Slow charging, again, it depends on what you mean by slow charging. So there are, and we'll talk about this more a little bit later, but on the slow end, there's really two types. There's level 1, which is a 110 outlet, and level 2, like a 240 circuit. So those are both might be considered in the slow charging, something you do at your house, for example. Every one of those you do doesn't really matter from a battery life standpoint. Those two are pretty equivalent. As far as your garage goes, as I mentioned earlier, batteries don't like extremes, but your garage is unlikely to hit the extremes that are going to be a problem. And for instance, in terms of extremes for cold, the Leaf and the Tesla are two of the best-selling electric vehicles in Norway this year. Not electric vehicles, but all vehicles. And that's a very cold climate, and that's worked out very well. In hot climates, there have been some issues, but the manufacturers are working on their chemistries to change, to make them more resilient in hot climates like Arizona and places like that. But a garage shouldn't be a problem.
Great, thanks. And so speaking of charging, Ron, why are there 3 types of DC fast charging options, and is there a way to standardize these types of chargers? This question comes from Michael in California and Patrick in Oregon.
Well, that's a good question. And first, let me point out that the good news here is that for level 1 and level 2 charging, there is only one type of connector for the most part. It's called a J1772 plug, and all EVs on the market today either use that plug or have an adapter to use that plug. And this early in the resurgence of electric vehicles, having that standard for the primary way people charge is really pretty amazing, and it's helped the adoption curve accelerate because you only don't have competing standards at the level 1 and level 2 charging. For level 3 charging, which usually is considered like a DC connection, there it gets more difficult because you're connecting into the vehicle kind of at a underpinning how it works level. And so there are currently basically 3 kinds of standards. There's a SAA combo and then a CHAdeMO connectors. They've come through the standards process and they are standards. The good news on those is you can create a charging station that has cables for both without adding a lot of expense. So hopefully that's something that will start to occur. The third kind is the Tesla. And one of the reasons why they're different is that they charge at just a much faster rate than the other two. Because they have bigger batteries, Tesla felt they needed to have a higher capacity system, so that's why they went their own route. Where that's going to go, it's really we're kind of like those that are older on the call will remember the VHS and Betamax efforts and wars back in the early days of VCRs. The market has to work that out, and but the good news is on the level 1 and level 2 there is a standard, and on the other ones it'll work it out as the market sees which one's is best.
Thanks, Ron. So, Ron, if I could turn to you once again. Alexander in Texas asks, I charge my Leaf using 110 volts. Would it use less energy per charge if I used a 220-volt charging dock instead?
Yeah, I was curious about this too when I got mine, because when I got my Leaf, we kind of bought it we hadn't really planned to buy it just yet, and so we hadn't. Normally, you would get the charging station put in your house first, so we used 110 for about the first month, and my back of the envelope, kind of readings was also looking at other folks' experience on the internet and forums and such. I'm seeing people say they're seeing about an 8 to 10% savings from a 220 charge. I don't have any theoretical or definitive numbers on that, but that's the general rule of thumb I'm seeing from what I saw and what others have commented on.
Great, thanks. So our next question comes from Adrian in California, Michael in Texas, and Michael in Oregon. And I'd like to turn to Rachel Neeler to answer this question. She's been on deck, but now it's time to step into the batter circle. So they ask, what is the state of battery development with respect to cost, energy storage, and EV range, and what can be expected in the near future? Rachel?
Thanks, Josh. Yeah, this is a really exciting part of EVs right now. There's been a lot of recent investment in battery development for vehicles. The Department of Energy has the Joint Center for Energy Storage Research, whose goal is to create batteries with 5 times the energy storage capacity, 5 times cheaper in the next 5 years. Tesla is investing in producing batteries domestically and expects to drive costs down by 30%. Nissan is already building batteries in Smyrna, Tennessee, and GM just announced they'll be expanding their EV production in Detroit. So all of this means really good things for the future of batteries. Right now, the price of batteries is around $500 to $600 per kilowatt hour, and the longest range commercially available is 85 kilowatt hours and goes about 265 miles on a full charge. However, the research and public and private investments are just going to make batteries even better in the future.
Thanks. So my next question comes from a whole host of people, and Rachel, you should be well positioned to answer it, considering it is in your wheelhouse area of expertise. And that question is, what are the facts behind the life cycle environmental impacts for modern batteries in today's electric vehicles?
Yeah, you might have heard any number of environmental life cycle assessments that have been done on EVs, which measure the total greenhouse gas emissions for EVs. These assessments look at the vehicle from the extraction of raw materials to the production and use of the vehicle, all the way to the disposal and recycling of the vehicle parts. There's been a handful of assessments done, but they rarely come to the same number due to some of the underlying assumptions in the analyses. The literature does suggest that EVs usually emit fewer greenhouse gas emissions over the life cycle than their gasoline counterparts. And it's important to understand the entire life cycle of vehicles, so we're not just shifting greenhouse gas emissions from one source to another. So most studies suggest that the upfront production of electric vehicles produces more greenhouse gas emissions than a similar gasoline car because of the extra battery required. But over the life of the vehicle, the EV emits fewer greenhouse gas emissions while driving, and consequently ends up emitting less greenhouse gas emissions overall. UCS is right now doing work, I'm working right now, on the life cycle environmental impacts of electric vehicles. And we're doing this to help the public and policymakers better understand the life cycle of EVs. So definitely stay tuned for my report in the near future.
We will, thanks. So Rachel, when an EV meets the end of the road, so to speak, what happens with the EV's batteries? And so this is a question that comes from Adrian in California, Pat in Iowa, Amy in California, and Barbara in Colorado, who all wanted to know, what is the current status for recycling spent batteries?
Yeah, that's a great follow-up question, Josh, because recycling is part of the life cycle environmental impacts of EVs. Currently, there are a couple major companies, one in Canada and one in Belgium, that are prepared to recycle lithium-ion batteries from vehicles, but they all use different processes. Interestingly, we use a diverse types of batteries related to the chemistry within the lithium-ion battery. And so a lot of the recycling depends on whether it's cost-effective to reuse those parts within the battery. There's a lot of research going on not only to improve the materials inside the battery, but also to improve the recyclability of the batteries. These efforts make recycling much more cost-effective, which encourages more recycling and can reduce the environmental burdens of the batteries.
Thanks. So, Rachel, I spoke earlier about how regional electricity grids affect the emission profiles of electric vehicles. And in this vein, Luke from Mississippi asked, what are the most viable pathways to clean energy to power electric vehicles?
Yeah, as you said, the State of Charge report does show that there are better regions to plug in EVs than others, but the great news is that they are all better than the average conventional vehicle. And luckily, most of us, over 40% of us, live in the U.S. areas where driving an EV is actually better than a hybrid as well. The areas with the cleanest grid have less coal and more renewables like wind and solar. And it's definitely understandable. All of us try to take our part in trying to be environmentally responsible. So it's understandable to have concerns about plugging into coal, but there are a few other options. For example, many electric companies offer green power programs, but you can also purchase renewable energy certificates or even generate your own renewable energy by installing solar panels on your house. And you can definitely find some more information on those options in the State of Charge report as well.
Very cool. Thanks. So that concludes our questions for our panelists, but I did want to mention a tip that we got from one of the UCS members who we sent the survey out to, and that tipster said, encouraging workplaces in your area to offer outlets for charging while at work is a relatively inexpensive way to essentially double the range of electric vehicles and will really help promote a greater adoption of EVs. And we at the Union of Concerned Scientists have to agree with that, because as part of our Half the Oil plan, as I mentioned earlier, is focusing on the penetration of EVs into the marketplace and onto our roads. And one great way to do that is to encourage your workplace to offer charging for electric vehicles in that workplace. And so my colleague Dave Reichmuth actually just wrote a great blog on this subject which is called Workplace Charging, Good for Business, and a chance for business to do good. You can find it at the UCS blog, which is at the web address below. It's blog.ucsusa.org. And if I can give you a sneak peek, Dave discusses the importance of workplace charging for two primary reasons. One is that if you are a driver of a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, or an electric vehicle that has both a gasoline motor and electric motor, topping off your charge at work will allow plug-in hybrid electric vehicle owners to drive more miles on electricity rather than needing the gasoline engine to kick in. And in addition, the survey that I mentioned earlier in this Hangout found that access to charging is the single biggest factor that can increase electric vehicle ownership. In fact, about 35% of households that could use a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle lack parking or access to plug. This means that providing these households with a place to charge at work would allow them to get over that hump and use an electric vehicle, and therefore we could see more electric vehicles on our streets, further cleaning up our transportation system and further reducing our nation's oil use. So, one of my...
I'd like to add something to that.
Sure, Ron, go ahead.
The organization I belong to, the EVADC, we're a chapter of the Electric Automobile Association, and we do a lot of work with trying to encourage workplace charging. Being located in the Washington, D.C. area, a lot of our members actually work for some organization within the federal government, so there's efforts there. Other chapters do the same thing. So if you have a workplace issue and you want to try to, get some help, another place to look for is look for a chapter of the Electric Automobile Association. They're at electricauto.org. EVADC is evadc.org in the Washington, D.C. area. And there's a lot of people there that are working on these things, and we'd love to talk to you.
Absolutely. And also my colleague Dave provides some links and tips on how to advocate for workplace charging, and we would certainly encourage you to do so at your workplace or at a friend's or family's workplace as well, and we would be happy at the Union of Concerned Scientists to help provide you with the resources to enable you to do so as well. So I will end the slideshow here. Oh, that worked. Great. Here I am. So in conclusion, I would just like to thank all of you for participating in this excellent Hangout. Thank you for your very thoughtful and detailed questions. As a reminder, if we did not get to your particular question, my colleague Lucy will be following up with you individually, and always feel free to reach back out to us with any follow-up questions. We love hearing from you, our members far and wide, and we love helping you promote electric vehicles as a solution to our oil use. So I would like to thank our panelists as well, starting with Ron here in DC, Rachel in the office right next to me, and Nigel all the way from Colorado. We hope you found this informative, and we'd love to hear your feedback on this if you'd like to see similar Hangouts in the future, so please drop me or my colleague Lucy a line. You can find our contact information on the UCS website, which is ucsusa.org. So thank you again for participating, and have a great evening.